All right, everybody, thank you once again for coming to this webinar brought to you by Inszone and Pinney. There's a lot of really exciting things happening in the country today. Fed cutting rate, the big beautiful bill, and a lot of people are approaching us with questions about how to better manage their business assets. And so we're really excited today to have John McDonough on here to talk to us about some really exciting strategies for business owners. And this is going to be, part one of 6 webinars. So very excited to have you, John. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take the floor?
All right, Sean, thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks for making the time today. I know your time's valuable. And if you're here, it's because you've built something real. And once you do that, the game changes. The strategies that got you to 8, 9 figures aren't necessarily the strategies that keep it in the family for the next generation. So today on this webinar, we're going to talk about how high net worth families like yourselves turn illiquid wealth into generational control, not theory, not a commodity of insurance, actual liquidity engineering. So a quick snapshot about me and what I do so you have context. I work with successful founders, business owners, and closely held companies. And my lane is advanced life insurance and tax mitigation design for 8 and 9 figure estates. And I want to set the tone early. Today isn't about buying a product. It's about solving a balance sheet problem with tools wealthy families have used for the last 100 years. Think of life insurance not as a policy, but as a liquidity engine. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The IRS doesn't send sympathy cards. They send invoices. And most of you don't have a net worth problem. You most likely have a liquidity problem. If your family needed 7 or 8 figures fast, what's getting sold first? And is that the thing you actually want to be sold? Or is it just the easiest to liquidate? So here's a question for you to consider. How are you currently thinking about liquidity inside your estate plan? Is it something you feel confident in? Or is it more of a, well, we'll deal with it later kind of file? And the IRS has exactly 0 chill. There's no box you can check that says, hey, can we do this in about 5 years when the market rebounds or when you have a liquidity event? No, estate taxes are due 9 months after date of death, and that payment is due in cash and it's non-negotiable. And that's when the disaster scenarios start to show up. That's where you hear about fire sales, forced sales, horrible timing, family conflict, worthy of a Netflix miniseries. And none of these events happen because people were careless per se. They happen because the plan didn't include any liquidity on demand. So most people assume we've got time, or the kids will figure it out, or my CPA will tell us when it's a problem. But here's the truth. When you don't design liquidity into the plan, somebody else controls the timeline. And unfortunately, in this case, it's most often the IRS. Life insurance is simply a financial tool that lets you control who gets paid, when, and on what terms. So here we have a policy that's inside of an ILIT, inside of an estate plan. And the outcome, when structured properly, it becomes dollars on demand exactly when the estate needs them the most. Here's the magic trick that the wealthy use. You're the insured. You set up an ILIT, Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, that owns a policy that creates tax-free dollars to your heirs and your beneficiaries. A $10 million death benefit owned by an ILIT means income tax-free, estate tax avoidance, no forced liquidation or sales, and no fire drill at the worst possible moment. Imagine your family not having to sell real estate, stock, or the business just to pay the IRS tax bill. Imagine the IRS not being your largest beneficiary. And how would that kind of control change how you feel about your current plan? And this isn't just about estate tax. Wealthy families for the last 100 years use this structure clearly to fund estate taxes, but also to execute buy-sell agreements, create fairness between active and non-active heirs, replace assets that may have been given to charity, and keep businesses inside of the bloodline. Right now, if your kids looked at your estate plan, would they say, yeah, it feels fair? Or, man, this is just equal on paper. It doesn't make any sense. And speaking of those active versus inactive heirs, you all know the dynamic. You know, two kids work in the business, one doesn't. Who gets what? Who feels slighted and left out? Who feels over rewarded? If you split everything a third, a third, a third, someone's resentful. If you give the business to the operators, someone feels definitely cut out. And the problem is fair isn't always equal, and equal isn't always fair. And when you're no longer in the room, how do you want your kids talking about your decisions? So think of an ILIT as a firewall. It owns the policy, so the IRS cannot drag the death benefit back into your taxable estate. Simple structure, massively huge impact. And this isn't a set it and forget it strategy. It becomes the operating system for your family's capital. Estate tax exclusion, creditor and predator protection, controlled distributions over time, generational governance, and integration with dynasty trusts and succession plans. It's how families stay wealthy for generations. Think Rockefellers, and not just one or two inheritance cycles. Think Vanderbilts. So the best results happen when your legal, tax, and insurance professionals are aligned with one another, not in their separate silos. What we do is we integrate with your team. We're not looking to replace them. And this is where coordination sets us up for big wins. So here's a real example. Before there's a $40 million business, there's a $4 million real estate tax problem, zero liquidity. And so the solution would have been a fire sale to raise the $4 million to pay the IRS 9 months after the date of death. The after effect of working with us was the ILIT owned a survivorship policy on both husband and wife. Upon both of their death, estate taxes will be funded. The operator is able to keep the business. The non-active heir receives equivalent assets. There's no forced sale, no drama, no compromises. Here's a question for you. If nothing changed for you, and we fast forward 10 or 15 years from now, which version plays out for your family? The before or the after? And what would it mean for your family if the after version was the default outcome and not the lucky outcome? At the end of the day, without planning, there's chaos and forced sales. With planning, there's liquidity and control. With life insurance included into the planning, there's multi-generational stability. So the question is simple. Do you have a liquidity and control strategy that works without you having to be here? And the roadmap, it's clean. Number one, review liquidity and estate tax exposure, and we can help you with that. 2, model the tax and funding gap, and we can help you with that as well. And 3, engineering the Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust and the policy structure to fill the gap properly. Now, which area do you feel is your biggest gap right now? Is it on the clarity? Is it on the structure? Or is it on the execution? So let's consider some questions. I want you to think about this for potentially setting up a one-on-one conversation with us. What we talked about has landed hardest for you? And where do you see the biggest risk in your current situation? And there's really three quick takeaways. Liquidity is leverage. No liquidity equals forced decisions that will not make people happy. 2, properly structured life insurance equals control at the moment your family needs it the most. And number 3, irrevocable life insurance trusts, or ILITs, and coordinated planning create multi-generational protection, not just a single payout. If you don't know what your estate tax exposure or your liquidity gap is, that should be your next move. And my team can model it so you know exactly what those numbers look like today or into the future. So next month, we're breaking down the business owner's exit blueprint, how to design and transition on your terms and not the market's terms. So with that, I'll leave you with my email, jmcdonough@pinneyinsurance.com. Email me to begin the conversation, and I'm happy to talk with you. And Sean, you might have some questions for me.
Yeah, I do. Really interesting stuff. So one of the questions that was going through my head, John, as you were talking is, I know that I've encountered business owners that might have life insurance for this purpose, but not enough. But what I've noticed is a lot of them have not thought about using an ILIT because they don't know what that is. So can you articulate like the biggest benefits of using an ILIT and what happens when you don't?
Yeah, most business owners, that's a common question. I get that a lot too. In fact, I was having a conversation last night with 2 business partners, and we were talking about this very subject. The conversation was really going around a buy-sell agreement, but it also split off into having irrevocable life insurance trust for them to get certain things out of their taxable estate. So most business owners are very familiar with an entity called an LLC, or limited liability corporation. An LLC gets an EIN number. It has an operating agreement. Maybe there's multiple members of it, but everyone knows what an LLC is. From an estate planning perspective, there are trusts. There's grantor trusts, there's revocable trusts, and then there's irrevocable trusts. The IRS has set in the tax law the provision for irrevocable life insurance trusts that can sit outside of an individual's taxable estate. And what that means is it gets its own EIN number. It has its own equivalent operating agreement or trust documents, that trust covenants, which stipulate what the trust can do, what the trust can't do, who the beneficiaries are, who the contingent beneficiaries are, who the trustees are, et cetera, et cetera. But the irrevocable life insurance trust is specifically designed to sit outside of a wealthy couple or wealthy individual's taxable estate, so that upon death of either one or the couple, creates a liquidity event, because the trust will have ownership of a life insurance policy based on that individual's life, or based on the husband and wife together in what's called a second to die policy. But upon that death event, it creates instant liquidity in the form of cash. So when that death certificate is sent to the insurance carrier, that insurance carrier will wire that death benefit amount into the trust within a 5-day period of time. And that trust now has instant liquidity that can be used to pay any potential estate taxes that would be due to the IRS within 9 months of the date of death.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for answering that question. The second one that I had was, insurance carriers that you prefer using for these sort of agreements, and when you use each type of carrier, if you have a preferred 2 to 3.
Yeah, that's a good question too. We are, as you well know, carrier agnostic and product agnostic. And what we mean by that is we genuinely will search the entire marketplace to find the very best carrier with the very best product for that particular client's situation. It's all facts and circumstance based. And what I mean by that is certain carriers do well with a certain age class. Certain carriers do better with a single life versus a second to die policy. Certain carriers handle tobacco better. Certain carriers handle cholesterol better. Certain carriers handle, if you're a pilot and fly private as a pilot, those types of things. And our underwriting team reviews all of those in advance of submitting any application to an insurance carrier, because what we're trying to do is make sure that not only is the product the best available product in the marketplace for the facts and circumstances of that client, but we're also trying to make sure that that carrier is a carrier that has a history of meeting the promises that they say they can meet. And we're not talking 5 years, 10 years down the road. We're talking 30, 40, 50 years down the road potentially, right? So all of those things come into play when we pick the right product or solution for our clients. But the bottom line is, we're looking at every major carrier, every major product within that carrier's suite to find the best available, customized, bespoke solution for these clients.
Awesome. And then my last question is, a lot of times when I'm looking at these deals, there are certain types of businesses where I'm like, I'm really glad that you specifically are getting this. So in your experience, like what types of businesses do you feel like need this sort of planning the most?
The successful. It's not really carrier specific, or excuse me, it's not industry specific. It's really not. It's valuation, right? It's valuation, because we deal with privately held small to medium sized businesses, right? So these are people that mostly own 100% of these enterprises, or a very large portion of the enterprises, with very little private equity that's in play already at this point. If private equity is involved at all, it's on a very minimal scale. They used it from a leverage or a magnification, not an exit strategy. So most of our clients have this massive business valuation, which is sitting on their personal financial statement, which is creating a massive net worth that is above the estate tax exclusion, the federal estate tax exclusion, but it's highly illiquid, right? It only becomes liquid if there's an exit that takes place or a liquidity event that takes place. So in the absence of a liquidity event, right, the most ideal client profile would be, as we mentioned before, a client that is sitting on a 8-9-figure business, maybe even a high 7-figure business from a valuation standpoint. Mostly the majority of the shares are privately owned, either by them individually or within their family or amongst a couple individuals. And they really don't have an understanding of where that cash that the IRS requires 9 months after the date of death would come from to pay that bill. Those are the best clients for this particular conversation today.
Awesome, John. Well, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar today. We really enjoyed having you. I really enjoyed listening to John and having this conversation. Again, if you have any questions or you want to look into business valuations and getting this sort of planning, please email John at this email, jmcdonough@pinneyinsurance.com. And just a reminder that we're going to be doing several of these webinars over the next couple of weeks, so attend them all. They're going to be great tools for planning of every business type. So thank you once again for coming. We will send out the recording within 24 hours of this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Thank you.